Hello, everyone. Welcome to Genealogy Adventures. My name is Brian Sheffy.
And I'm Danya Williams, and we have a great show for you guys today. We are right back where we started, where we left off. We're doing our second part of honoring the 6888, the women of the all-Black female battalion of World War II and the Postal Battalion. So today we are going to be talking with the head and lead of this particular battalion, which is, her name was, during that time, she was Major Charity Early. But we're going to be talking to her son and daughter, Stanley Early and Judith Early. Mr. Early began his career in government with the city of Dayton, Ohio, as a management analyst in the Office of Management and Budget. His extensive professional career spans more than 40 years with the experience both in public and private sectors. Previously, Mr. Early previously worked for Prince George's County in the Office of Management and Budget from 1996 to 2003, rising to the director position, then the Deputy Chief Administrator Office for Budget, Finance, and Administration for PG County. Ms. Judy Early is the youngest daughter of Major Charity Early, and she received a BA in journalism and an MA in education. She's also the author of a fiction book called 8 to 5. Welcome to the two of you.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So I want to just jump right in. I want to, just really pick up where we left off, and I want you guys to just tell us about your mom as a mom, and then how she, got into joining the Army.
Well, that's a hard question in a way, because when we were growing up, this was never something you thought about, and later on, we were aware of it. I would say, I don't know what Judy would say. I certainly would say that we had wonderful parents, and she was always engaged in so much stuff in the community. We were always, one of the things that was always, both my mother and my father were, and so there were always discussions of what was going on and so forth, and so but it was, in terms of growing up, she was mom. So.
Okay.
And
Good,
Judy?
Brian.
I was going to say, and Judy?
Well, we're 6 years apart. So, when he went off to college, I was in the, the 4th grade, I think it was. And so I spent a lot of time with my mother, around the house and running errands. But I know that she often went off to board meetings with different organizations, or they would invite her to come speak, and she would go out of town to give a speech. But I didn't think anything about that, because whatever you grow up with, you think that's normal. And so she was just my mother. I don't even know when I actually found out that she had been in the Army, that both of our parents had been in the Army, until, I don't know, I was much older. She was just my mother.
So you never saw her turn into that lieutenant colonel or that major during that time? Like, was she always just mom, or was there ever a moment when the switch, you saw the switch?
I wouldn't say
I don't remember ever seeing the switch. I don't.
I wouldn't say the switch, but I would say, she had a number of leadership roles, and I saw her in that situation. She was, for a number of years, she was the chair of the Housing Authority in Dayton. She was she was vice president of Sinclair College. She was on the board of a bank and on the board of a
Red Cross.
she was on the Red Cross. She was on the national board of Red Cross, and she was involved in lots of different organizations. And I did have an interesting experience when I was at the beginning of my career. So there was some issue between the city of Dayton and the United Appeal. And United Appeal was, at that time in Dayton, was a board created that was made up of the United Way and the Red Cross. And my mother was, I don't know whether she was the chair of the United Appeal or she was one of the officers. And so there was a meeting held in City Hall about whatever this issue is, and I cannot remember what the issue was. And I was there at the table, but I was, of course, like supporting staff. My mother was sort of leading the other discussion. My mother was she was really effective in the meeting. And the reason she was really effective in the meeting is because she read everything. And one of the things that she did, which I wish I could say I do, I try to, but I'm not, is that she read everything. So you go into this meeting and it's, and she'd say, well, and she, well, this is fine, except on page 15, that bottom paragraph clearly says da 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 da. That she really was aware of all those things that nobody else really knew. And because she was so thorough, she was really, really effective. And that's something I saw. And I saw that in other occasions, but that was a time that I first became really aware of it.
Well, that's interesting because as you were talking about that, I was thinking about our previous episode, and there was a story that kind of came out about your mom, saying that she was in England. I guess one of her ranking officers came to visit the base and wanted to see the women. So he expected this turnout. He wanted to see all of them, and she's like, "No, love, they're working. So I will muster the women who are available to meet you, but the rest of them are doing their job." So she just seems, is this a right impression? She seems to strike me as a very practically minded woman who was just prepared on just kind of every level.
I would say that's a fair statement. I'm not sure whether that had occurred in England or France. Maybe it was in England. I can't remember. But yeah, there's a you probably have, there's a documentary. You probably have seen it, and you probably talked about it. And they talk about that really well. Yes, I would say that she definitely had a very practical streak in that sense. She's very thoughtful and very, I guess some things about my mother that I guess more personal, and Judy, you guys have. My mother really liked sports, particularly baseball, and my father was very into the arts, into music, and I'm really into the arts. And my sister is very much a baseball fan, so my mother was decidedly not musical, whatever the opposite of musical is, but she was very, very much into sports, and particularly baseball. And so she, that was something that was always really important. It was always in the background of life.
And are you aware of anything in her family background, like her parents and her siblings, if she had them, and grandparents? She seems to have felt very comfortable in a leadership role in public service. Is that was that a theme in her family?
Yes. Judy, you go ahead.
Well, her father, granddaddy, he was an AME minister, and was he a bank president?
I don't know.
He was a bank executive, but he was an AME minister. So she was a PK. And I'm sure she got a lot of that from him.
PK stands for preacher's kid, for those that didn't get it.
Yes. And
Do you think
the whole family, the whole side of the family with the last name Adams they have very strong leadership skills.
Yes.
Well, again, because I mean, I have to appreciate that skill in her, because in a lot of ways, she was dropped into an unenviable situation. I think that's the adjective I'm gonna go with, because being faced with such a huge backlog of mail, no real processes in place to deal with it, to get the mail processed in the front lines where the men were serving who needed that kind of morale. I just imagine the inner fortitude that someone had to have, and the confidence that they would have to feel as though they could tackle that.
You know, you hit something that's interesting, because and the family thing is interesting too, and because I mean, I would say that she was, I don't know what the right word is, but the idea that you have a thing to do, you figure out the way to do it, you proceed to do it, and you do the very best you can, and hopefully that will be successful. And I will say that she had a brother who was an AME bishop, and she had a sister who became the head of a business school at Florida A&M, and another brother who became a State Department, one of the highest, was at the time, one of the highest ranking African Americans in the State Department. They were but they were not, the whole group was not they were not braggarts. They were like, you have a task, you go do it, and you expect to do it. And my mother was very much like that. And I can remember from both my parents the sort of sense that, I'm not going to tell you what you should do, but whatever you should do, you do the best you can. It's not, and I think that was true. Honestly, the situation you're describing is clearly very difficult. I can see my mother dealing with it, I can see her dealing with it. And she definitely was proud of what they did. I'm jumping around, but there was an event and you probably can look it up in C-SPAN. There was an event in the 1990s when President Clinton had, there was an event that was honoring Black veterans, honoring basically all Black veterans. It was basically a pageant that went on for hours, but it was on C-SPAN, and at the end of the event, Shelley Casfili, who was the chair of the Joint Chiefs at the time, introduced my mother and gave a terrific introduction. And then my mother introduced President Clinton. And my mother was always a very good speaker. That was one of her best skills, was she was an excellent speaker. And she gave one of her best speeches. And then Clinton came up after the introduction and said something which I've always, I frankly have always been proud of. He said, I don't want to put a damper on the events of this evening, but I have to decide whether I should dismiss or just demote the person who decided I should speak after Colonel Early. And that was, it was a great event. She was very proud of what they did.
So as a woman, and specifically as a Black woman, did she talk about or relay any instances where she got resistance or pushback?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Um, I don't know if it was as much pushback for being a woman as it was pushback for being African American. That that event that you mentioned about her superior officer wanting to see all the women, um, when he found out the process that she was doing, she had them divided up into 3 shifts, I think. I think it was 3 shifts. So you were either sleeping, working, or on your break or something like that. I don't know, but it was 3 shifts that she had developed, and he wanted to see everybody, and she explained, well, that group is asleep right now, and that group is doing this, and that group is doing that, and he said that, you know, he was not happy, and he was going to send a white officer to show her how to do her job, because obviously she couldn't handle this. And I what did she say, over my dead body or
Over my dead body. She said, over my dead body. Sir, over my dead body, sir.
so,
Yeah.
so I mean, this was in the 1940s, so obviously she was going to get a lot of pushback for being colored, and also in Europe, they were not even used to seeing a lot of Black people. So the Europeans were kind of curious, and some of their behavior, I guess, could be considered insulting, but you had to remember that they didn't see Black people. So the answer to your question is yes. Pushback.
So did she tell you guys any stories about, like, after you got older or what have you, of different things that may have happened? Because I know sometimes our families don't tend to talk about the past all that much. And I think that's one of the problems as a genealogical researcher that we tend to have when they don't want us to know something. They're like, why don't you just leave it there and not, just let it go. So did she, talk to you guys about some of the things that she went through, or any other stories that she gave other than the one that you just talked about, which happens to be my favorite? But yeah.
Not with me. I learned things from reading the book.
Okay.
We never, I mean, I don't think it was a question of her wanting to hide it. It just, like I said, she was my mother, so we didn't talk about it. I don't know about with my brother, but we didn't.
I think when she started, because we all had been on her about writing this book, and in the 80s when she started writing a book, she did talk about stuff more. And I mean, one story. Well, let me say one story, and which you may be aware of, and then I want to talk about this. There was some stuff that happened when she was writing the book. When they were coming back and they got on the ship, and the officer, everybody's going back to the United States. The war's over, and there were thousands of people on the ship, thousands of soldiers. There were women, Black women and white women in their units on board. The white nurses did not want my mother to be in command of them because they felt they should, but my mother was the ranking officer. So they wanted to have their own command, and that was simply denied. And so some of them said they were going to, they wouldn't travel with the black officer in command of them. And my mother went down and said, that's fine. We're all going home. You have 15 minutes to get off the ship because they're leaving. And after that, when she finished that, it turned out the captain of the ship was standing behind her and said, Colonel Early is correct, or Major Early, I don't remember if she's Major or Colonel at that point. And and by the way, it's now 14 minutes. So,
Oh, wow.
She did have things happen. She talked about some incidents on trains in the United States. But one thing that I do want to point out is that when she was writing the book, one thing I did get to read was she had kind of a memoir that she'd written in 1946 that was, so this is like in the 1980s, so it's like 40 years later. She'd written this memoir in 1946, and a lot of the material that's in the book, in One Woman's Army, is in that memoir, but it's written very different. And there are two things about it that were quite striking, and now it's been many years since I read it. One was this person who wrote this was just finishing taking nearly 1,000 women overseas in a war, and was very strong and powerful in their image of what they've done, and feeling very gung-ho about it, and not as good a writer as the person 40 years later, but a whole different perspective, really, much younger perspective. And also, there was another aspect. Of course, this is this person who, I'm not even a glimmer in anybody's eye at this point. So it's kind of fascinating, this person who will become your mother. But the other thing is there are incidents that in the book talk about discriminatory actions where the reference is a little different, because it's almost like, in this case, they didn't discriminate. It was so prevalent that when somebody didn't didn't discriminate, that was the thing that was worth noting. It was like you just were going to be discriminated against. So when somebody didn't, that was the thing that you noted, and that was a whole different perspective. Even it showed how the shift that had occurred, and so forth. So that was an interesting item for me.
Well, you just actually raised something that I've never really thought about. I'm aware of it, but I've never spent that much time discussing it. So we know from the men serving in the military, the racism that they faced, both on the field, in training, when they got back home, transport out, transport back. Never really thought about the racism between women, between Black women and white women. So you just relate this episode where your mother's in command of all of these women. She's taken them back. She's taken them. She's gone with them to Europe, brought them back, presumably all of them, safely. But being
all but three.
And then being met with resistance by white nurses. That kind of it doesn't stun me, but it disappoints me, I guess.
I mean, I think when I remember, and I can't even remember whether this is in the book or not, but I remember my mother talking about it when she was in officer training at Fort Des Moines, that there were classes that were divided up. There were, we're in a war. We're in like a war a survival level war. There were classes where there was there was an instructor for white men, an instructor for black men, an instructor for white women, an instructor for black women. And like, you know, at some point after like a round of these classes, some couple rounds of these classes, somebody realized, you know, we could have actually one person teach this and they could all sit in the same room, you know, and listen to the lecture. You know, it just shows you how, you know, the alterations that had to occur. And it does make me think about, you know, what, you know, I'm not aware. I mean, you know, I've read books, I talked to people, and I have some sense of post-World War II, but I'm not aware of pre-World War II America in terms of, but those are the things that made me realize that to whatever degree post-World War II America was racist, that pre-World War II must have been dramatically worse. I mean, and we're coming out of, you know, because you look at what happened in the 20s and you had the Depression in the 30s, which had to make it worse. So,
you know, plus in the 20s, there, you know, there was all that lynching that
absolutely.
was going on because, again, we were in the depths of Jim Crow. But I do find it profoundly disappointing that, you know, your mother's on the front lines in service to her country, which that group of nurses would have known or should have been aware of, because she's not wearing a uniform for nothing, you know, to play fancy dress up, and that service just didn't seem to matter. It just didn't seem to count.
Yeah, that's sad.
So I don't know if at this point we have any questions from the audience.
No, not yet.
Okay.
They're just listening in awe like I am. I mean, I'm telling you, I fell in love with this lady, and I'm like, because, I mean, well, first of all, I'm telling you, so I guess we can go into the genealogical side of this whole thing. Because when I first heard about the 6888 and then learned about Lieutenant Charity, her last name was originally Adams.
Right.
And I was like, oh my God, is this lady related to me? Because if she is, I'm going to be so excited. You know? So, because it just explains the strength of my family and how not that it explains it, but it fits with the women in my family and the strength that they carry. And I'm like, it's only natural that she has to be related to me.
Okay.
Well, that, and considering we have a number of Adams, it's the right part of South Carolina. It's the you couldn't ask for a more perfect part of South Carolina for us to connect in.
Yeah. So you were going into that before the show. Tell us more about where she came from.
Okay, so, and you guys may be able to tell me stuff that so Cokesbury is in Greenwood?
Yes.
In county, and my knowledge of that is somewhat limited, but I do know that my mother's mother, I'm sorry, my mother's father grew up there and was one of about a dozen children. He eventually went to Biddle University, which became Johnson C. Smith, and he was either the youngest child or the youngest male child. I don't know which. And they had enough people to work the farm. They were very interested in education, and my grandmother Adams was a Nash, also from Cokesbury, and she, in some ways, her education is more extraordinary because it's a Black woman circa 1900, and she got a normal degree one of the things that we've found, I've run into people from all over the country who've come out of Cokesbury and come out of that county, that there seemed to be such a focus on education. When my Aunt Lou, my mother's sister, died around 2007, something like that, 6 or 7. I went to the funeral, and there were a lot of people there from Cokesbury. And there was a woman who was she was a officer of the church. I don't remember exactly what. She wasn't the pastor. And she talked about the AME church there and was saying they were very proud of the fact that everybody who was at least 21 in the church was either in college or had gone to college. And they were very focused on this education thing. And I have run into people from Charlotte, from DC area and so forth, that have come out of that community. And there seems to have been something in that community at the very early 20th century that was very focused on education. And education is the way we will survive as people, and so forth.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but something happened there.
I may have a partial answer for that, and Danya probably has the other part of the answer to that one as well. It was because specifically for that part of South Carolina, it's true across America at that period, but places like parts of Edgefield, parts of McCormick County, parts of Greenwood, our people had to fight to build their own schools, to get the land, to build their schools, to educate their kids. And I guess when you have to fight that hard for something, it just becomes cherished. It's not even meaningful. It actually becomes something that's cherished because you had to fight so hard for it.
And given the fact that it was South Carolina and that area of South Carolina, that, they went through a really hard time after the Reconstruction period. So there were several quote unquote riots. They were fighting the Black codes. They were fighting Jim Crow. They were going through all of those different things to still be able to create these African-American schools that will allow them to move forward, because especially, unfortunately, in the area that your parents came from, Greenwood, Edgefield, all of that, they were hell-bent on holding Black people down. Like, it was not, they did not play games. They were determined. They didn't even, so for example, death records, birth certificates, things like that, they were mandated to be done for Black people in 1915. Well, there were other places in South Carolina that were giving death records for Black people, but not Edgefield. They had to be made to do everything. They had to, they had to be made to do it. They had to be mandated. If it wasn't mandated, then it wasn't getting done. And that was a part of where they lived. That was the Greenwood, the Edgefield, the Aiken, that was that whole Cokesbury, that was that area. So yeah, like Brian said, it was a cherished thing to be able to fight for it and win it and get it. And they had to go, they had to go through it. That's when they realized that education was it was very important, because they had to fight so hard for it.
Well, it's still carried forward, which is really quite fascinating.
And I would also imagine that as a community, and that's just even the wider Black community of the area, because you were literally under attack 24/7, 365 days a year, really brought that community together. It just, all that adversity just served to make them stronger. And it seems as though your mother, got some of that.
And
She
that would have
definitely
been,
got some of that.
yeah, it would have been, my grandfather grew up there, and she was born in North Carolina. Where, Judy, do you remember the town?
Kittrell, North Carolina.
And then they grew up in Columbia. Um, but that's really interesting. And by the way, my father was from Ohio. Grew up in Dayton and was born around somewhere along the Ohio-West Virginia border.
What was it called? I've forgotten. I can think of the name of that tiny little town.
So your mom, you said your mom was born in North Carolina. Is that Halifax County?
Kittrell, I don't know.
You don't know? Because a lot of the Adams in our family, well, so my Adams line, I have my great grandmother was Adams. Her name was Katie, and her father was Ezra, and Ezra had a good number of children, but he had one son who had more children than him, and he had his name was Arthur, and Arthur had about 16 children. Arthur was the first and only family that allowed me out of South Carolina with my research. They actually moved to North Carolina. So I'm wondering if that Adams group knew your mom's Adams group. And that would be I'm gonna now that you said Cokesbury, I'm looking for her. It's on and popping now.
Well, it's possible, but I've always thought that the North Carolina thing was like, that was not part of the law. That was like an event as opposed to a history, in the sense that, South Carolina was.
I was going to say the person that she should talk to is Madeline.
Yes, she should. Yes.
Our cousin Madeline, she's kind of into genealogy.
Right.
And she's gone through Ancestry.com and pulled up some records and things. And she could probably be more helpful on that than we can.
So you guys were never really interested in that portion? I mean, did you know your grandfather and personally?
I knew it. Judy might have been.
He passed away when I was like 8. I think grandmama died when I was 8 and granddaddy died when I was 9. So I met him. We visited his house. We visited them, but I didn't really know him. I was told that he baptized all of his grandchildren, so he baptized me as a baby. But I don't have any personal memories of Granddad.
And what was the name of the church again?
Bethel.
Bethel?
Yeah.
Bailey Bethel?
I don't know. It was.
I'm gonna look into it because I got a Bailey Bethel in Greenwood.
In Columbia.
Oh, it was in Columbia. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
this was all in Columbia.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, this is gonna sound silly. I have this memory of our grandfather taking all of the grandchildren and all of his children and their children to Cokesbury and to the woods. That land had become like just woods, and we went bear hunting. Now,
this is before I was born. Wasn't it before I was born?
And you wouldn't have done it anyway, right, Judy?
Or you were.
I don't remember ever going to Cokesbury.
Okay, well,
if I was there, I was an infant.
Well, I remember going to Cokesbury a few times, but this time we just, then we walked through the woods and, we were hunting bear and all that, but, it was funny.
Did you see a bear?
No, but anyhow, he had a shotgun and, he walked through the woods, and that was the big, and it was a big adventure for all of the very young grandchildren.
It sounds like fun.
It was.
It sounds like it's dangerous.
It was.
And I would have been the granddaughter that said, no, thank you, but I'll sit here with mom or something. I would have been that baby because yeah. I don't like dirt or walking through dirt or anything.
Well, I remember going to Cokesbury once, and there was a cousin, and I can't remember his last name, but I remember we played, and at one time I was probably, I don't know, he was in 6th grade, and I remember thinking he was really old, so I must have been very young, and so I never saw him again until actually that trip to South Carolina. I was talking about that funeral, and we're talking. I was sitting next to this guy. I was talking, and I realized I know who this guy is, and I started describing the farm that they grew up on, which didn't have running water, but it had a well in the front. And I described his entire, except I got the color of the well wrong. Other than that, and his older sister was there and explained that I was Hoppy. That was my nickname. And because I was Stanley Early and he didn't have any, but when I was a little kid, my nickname was Hoppy, and so he knew who I was.
Wow.
So you may not have the answer to this. Did your mother ever talk about whether she was still in touch with some of the women that were in her command?
I don't really know, except for she was in touch with, we were talking Campbell, Noel Campbell.
Nicole Campbell.
Nicole Campbell. But other than that, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you guys feel when you were approached about trying to get the entire 6AAA the Congressional Medal of Honor? Were you approached about that? And if you were, what were your feelings?
Well, I thought it was wonderful, but it had been the thing that had really brought it so much back into focus. The possibility was, where time flies, probably about 3 years now. The event, the statue and event at Fort Leavenworth, because that was just so extraordinary. And they had they had so many of the women who were still alive there. They had and they, at the command school of the United States Army, just as you drive up, there is this pond, and it has a giant statue of a buffalo soldier on horseback, and there are busts of significant African-American officers in U.S. military history. There's, Benjamin O. Davis. There's Colin Powell. There's, and now there's one of my mother, and was just wonderful. And they put it on a pedestal that had all of the. They managed to get the names of everyone in the unit except for 13. They're still trying to find those last 13. There were some names, except for those 13 names, they had the names of everybody who served in the 6AAA on the pedestal. It's so beautiful. And they did the initial bust. They're actually replacing the bust with a different one because they wanted to improve it. But it was, and then they had a parade for Fort Leavenworth for the women who never got that. And then there was an event unveiling, and there were the commander of the base and senior commanders in the Army, and senator from Kansas, and this is terrible, I'm blanking on his name, who was just so moved. He started talking about he never realized until this event that the 6888 had affected his family, because the letters that had kept his family together had come to the 6888. He never knew that in his, and so it was just an amazing event. And after that, with the documentary, with the because aside from the Congressional Gold Medal, they never got a unit citation. I mean, they never got a unit citation. So first they got that. That has already occurred. That took like a year after that. And then they, and now the Congressional Gold Medal, and hopefully we'll get through this time. And so it's really been the last. And then there are two different movie companies that have been looking at making a movie about the 6888 or about my mother, and they're doing their thing, and they're working, and we've talked to them, and hopefully they'll be successful. But it's always a million miles from the original concept to the completion of those things. So yes, it's become very tangible and exciting, but and while we had always gotten stuff every few years, and and there have been lots of things, the last 3 years have been pretty extraordinary.
Because I actually did a search on Time magazine during the World War II period. I couldn't find it. I mean, I found plenty of articles about men's service in the military. Didn't really see anything about even women in service during World War II. And again, I found that kind of surprising.
I don't think there was a whole lot.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I ever saw for women in World War II was them here and building, taking over where the men that had to leave the factories, these women went into the factories and started doing that type of stuff. But even then, when you saw that, they were talking about white women. They weren't talking about the Black women and their role in this whole situation. So that was what I saw.
Yeah, there was an interview we did with New York Times for the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II, and it was a really, I don't know whether you saw the article, it was a very good article and so forth. And one of the things that the woman who was the author, by the way, who is a retired, well, not retired in the sense, she spent a few years in the military as an officer. She's Black, and she's now a Times reporter. She did her own search of articles about during World War II about the 6888, and she found a couple of really like one paragraph items, and that's somebody in the business focused doing like major research, as she was interviewing people all over the country. So there was not much. There was some, but not much.
So I'm getting, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I have the wrong impression, but I am getting the impression that the women did their service. They came back on the ships. They got off the ships, and what were they told? Thank you for your service. You can go now. So like no thank you, no kind of official recognition.
Right. No kind of official recognition until there started to be in the 1990s. There started to be, and it's now sort of, and it's just, and I can say that, but I do want to make, I don't know, this is maybe a political economic comment or something, but one of the things that there was, which affected my mother, my father, millions of other people, and many members of 6888, was the GI Bill. The GI Bill, one of the things that really changed a lot. I mean, it created the opportunity for all kinds of education that people would not have had the opportunity for. And so there was that. But official recognition of 6888, other than thank you, no, that's, you know, and there are only, I think there were 11 members still alive when this happened, when this event happened I described in Kansas. I think there's like 7 now, maybe 6. So, you know, it's, it would be nice if this gets done, but there's still a few around to see it.
You know, we've tried very hard to get one of these surviving service women on the show, but you know, considering the age that they are, they have health issues, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, it just wasn't possible.
I will say I have met several in the last couple of years, and so some impressive women. And so, I met several at the event in Kansas, and then recently one in here in Prince George's at Prince George's County up in Greenbelt, where an event was done. So they really have been. It's really quite impressive.
I mean, I kind of take it for granted, and I think we in the modern age take it for granted about movement, the freedom, you know, the freedom to move. We're talking about a group of women who more than likely had never even left the county, much less the state that they had been born in. Your mother obviously did because she was born in North Carolina but lived in South Carolina. To go from that to go to living abroad, to service abroad in a foreign country when you haven't even left the county or probably even the town that you were born in. And again, where your mother came from was a very rural part of America. You know, so I say going from the transition from that to being on the kind of front service lines, I mean, that must have been quite a mental journey to
Well,
take.
you know, my mother had been at Wilberforce and then had gone back to was teaching in South Carolina when the war started. But you're right. There was and that's one of the things that is, you know, if you look sort of historically in terms of, for me, that one of the things that I'm always fascinated by, I love history. I just really do. I'm fascinated by sort of big movements of events. And one of the things that happened was millions of people left the country who never would have left even their part of their county or whatever. And, you know, it changed the perspective really dramatically, for better or worse, but it radically altered the perspective. And for many of these women, this was a life-altering event. But they were of every background, from having limited exposure to being well educated, to being from all over the country, and then there was the additional travel thing, because in some of the southern states they couldn't enlist, so they had to go north. And I think South Carolina was one of them. You know, you couldn't enlist in your home state because black women couldn't enlist, so you had to go to other places.
No, I just learned something new.
I think my mother, trying to remember whether she enlisted in New York or not, but
When she was at Ohio State?
yeah.
I mean, after she came out of Ohio State.
Yeah.
No, she was teaching.
She was
She
teaching.
was teaching when she decided to enlist. So
I think she had to go up to New York, but I'm not sure. A lot of people had to go up. You couldn't enlist black women couldn't enlist in the South.
So again, it's that theme of Black military service. Starting in, I know that we've had a history of fighting in every engagement in this country's history, but really starting with Civil War. Black men had to prove that they could indeed be soldiers fighting for the United States colored troops. So you would have felt that with the success with that, it would have been easy for men in world to serve in World War One. It
But it
wasn't.
wasn't.
And
Right.
you would think after they proved themselves in World War One, it would be easier in World War Two. And it wasn't. So this theme is still.
I mean, you can go back further than that. I was just looking at something the other day about the War of 1812, and 20% of the sailors who served in Great Lakes Fleet, all those were African American, and yet the Navy became the most segregated part of the armed services, So, it is we have a periodic problem or cyclic problem in this country that we have got to. It's a cycle that we've got to progress as a people or progress as a country. We have to break that cycle of repeating the same mistakes.
And I think that's an awesome way to end this show, because you have definitely, this is the reason why we wanted to have the two of you on this show, to end the cycle of not knowing our history, and giving people a different version, and letting them know, not a different version, the correct version, because I don't want anybody to ever get up here and look at our show and say, oh, they're doing what the new word is, revisionist history. This isn't revision. It's not revised. It's the rest of it. It's just the rest of it. And that's the,
I call it restorative. I call it restorative history.
yes, restorative. That's exactly what it is. It's that piece, that piece of that picture that was kind of blurred, and now we took it to the photo restoration, and they were able to put it back together the way it was supposed to be. That is the perfect word. That's restorative history. And I'm just so grateful that the two of you decided to come on and really, talk more about your mom and give us the human side of her, as well as just talking about the stories that she did share. Can you please share the name of the book that was written?
Shoot, it was
Yay!
One Woman's Army, which was written in which she wrote, I think, 87, and it's still available.
Yeah, it is. I thought I had a
I'll get
copy
it.
of it.
I'm definitely gonna get it.
And we will put a link to that in our broadcast.
Okay.
We
Thank
will.
you.
Well, thank you so much again. What was you going to say, Miss Judy?
You can purchase it from Texas A&M Press.
And
Texas A&M is an awesome school. I mean, I went to Jackson State, so I don't want any of my Jackson State fans to feel a certain way. But Texas A&M, when it comes to African Americans, specifically African American women, they've done a lot, because it was also Texas A&M for Opal, and the land grants and things of that nature, where it was helping Black people, help them get their land that they were owed, when even though their families were enslaved, they had access. They had, they were supposed to get parts of that land because they were children of the enslaver. And they really have this whole land grant situation where they will help you get your land. And this was all done by one of our family members named Opal Foster. Opal Lee, not Opal Foster, Opal Lee. And I just loved her dearly. She died about 5 years ago, but Texas A&M, they were the ones that did that. So kudos to them. They were very great. That's great.
And would you like to put Dania with next week?
So the third installment of the show will be Lieutenant, I believe she's Lieutenant Colonel Edna Cummings. Edna is the one that is spearheading the Congressional Medal of Honor. And we will also be talking with another daughter of one of the 688. Her name is Janice Martin. And Janice is the daughter to Indiana, I believe her name was, Indiana Martin. Do you know that name? Do either one of you know that name?
I
Um,
drove home.
I can tell you that I've been in a few events with Edna Cunningham, and she's really impressive.
She is very impressive.
She's you guys will really enjoy talking with her.
Well, thank you again for sharing your mom with us. And I've already started doing some research. I actually was researching. I've already come across them. I didn't even know it, Brian. I'm gonna tell you about it later. But I've actually already come across them. I sure have. So I'm excited.
So on that note, thank you everyone, however you've been watching us for the last hour. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to our guests for sharing such lovely stories about your mom and your memories and your thoughts. All of you at home, stay safe, be well, and we will see you next week when we have part 3 covering the 6th 888th Battalion. Until then,
Yes.
see you next week.
Bye.